Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast in partnership with Eliza Chat, where we explore real tools and stories for building mental strength in the modern world. Well, thank you, Dr. Wiz, for joining us on the Mental Fitness Podcast.
I'm excited to be here. Yeah, thank you so much for the invite.
Yeah, maybe just to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? You're very credentialed. You got quite a bit of an impressive resume. Why don't you say it in your own words? Tell us a little bit about your career journey.
Yeah, I wasn't planning to be a nutritionist. I actually took a nutrition class in my undergrad and I dropped out. It just wasn't for me. I was into other things at the time in my early 20s, nightlife, you name it. And at age 24, I had some low spots with mental health. And I got into nutrition and exercise, and it transformed me so rapidly that people started asking me for help. So I had a well-lit path to help people, and I decided to go to school and finish my undergrad and get a master's degree, and started off as a registered dietitian. That was, 2013. And I immediately launched a mental health focused practice. It's my group practice is called Nutrition in Recovery. And we brought nutrition education to addiction treatment centers. We brought groups and one-on-one counseling. And I quickly learned about eating disorders and addiction-like eating. And this was when gut bacteria research really started to explode. So I really tried to provide people with education about non-traditional topics in nutrition. So food and mood, eating for brain health, body image, mindful eating, soulful eating. And it was really exciting times building curriculum to be used in mental health settings. About 5 or 6 years into building a group practice, I decided to pursue a doctorate. I got a PhD from UCLA in public health, and I have a minor in health psychology. So I did some really rich mental health research looking at early life trauma, ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences, and mental health outcomes. I got really into the link between childhood adversity and food addiction, childhood adversity and eating disorders, et cetera. So I was able to contribute some pretty exciting papers to the scientific literature. And shortly thereafter, I launched an app called Wise Mind Nutrition, which provides nutrition education for mental health context. So the goal of the app is to not track calories or macros, but to track anxiety scores and depression scores and see how nutrition can be a lever that we could pull. Of course, I integrate movement and meditation and social support. I'm pretty sure all the things that you guys are focusing on as well. And then after my app launched, I started the Institute of Functional Medicine training to become a certified practitioner. That took about 3 years. And I really have spent the last year or so focusing on specialty lab testing, blood, saliva, stool, urine, to be able to build comprehensive treatment plans for people. And I do use AI to simultaneously analyze multiple data points and scour the medical literature. So I'm a combination of technology and ancient wisdom.
Yeah, I want to ask so many questions just based on the bio alone.
Yeah, why don't you go?
So much good stuff. Luke? I wrote down a few notes while you were giving your bio on a few topics I want to get into. One of them is gut microbiome. Like, I know that's kind of, some people say there's not a ton of research. It's kind of an emerging area. There is research though. So what's your thoughts about gut microbiome? From my understanding, there's a lot of like serotonin that's, developed in the gut and stuff, and the nerves that are connected to the gut and brain. Can you educate our audience on that?
The early days of microbiome or microbiota research lent itself to some easily accessible tests to people. And I remember those first few years of doing microbiome testing and getting a snapshot of the different bacteria that were present in higher amounts and lower amounts. And the early days were, let's try to supplement with specific strains of bacteria to sort of balance out the inner ecosystem. And I think that's where a lot of people eventually started scratching our heads and saying, hey, this isn't working out as well as we had hoped, right? Like, the gut microbiome is definitely malleable. But I remember doing some tests on myself where I did a baseline and then I took probiotics for a few months. tested again, and it was up, some of those lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species, and then stopping the probiotic and doing another test, and then it was sort of back to where it started, right? So it's not to suggest that we can't pull major levers on gut bacteria. We certainly can. But I do believe that more recently, a lot of my own interest has been less about the presence of specific strains, although that is very important, but also thinking about digestive health as a whole and being able to look at, what's in the stool to see if people are digesting fats properly, carbohydrates, protein, thinking more about stomach acid, et cetera. And so where I've landed is that the key emphasis on studying the gut should really be about inflammation, that there are bacterial signatures that are much more pro-inflammatory and some that are much more anti-inflammatory. And everyone's different. So there isn't like a perfect signature. And that's why there's got to be a lot of trial and error. But my research and my clinical work has suggested that the main goal is to try to create an environment in the GI tract that's not permeable, so not having leaky gut symptoms, and not promoting inflammatory processes, because I do believe that inflammation that starts in the gut travels throughout the periphery. Low-grade inflammation that people don't even know that they have is the key driver of adverse mental health stuff.
Yeah, see, inflammation in itself throughout the whole body, like nutrition seems like one of the strongest ways to fight inflammation, right? Like, does that mean avoiding processed foods and like these synthetic sugars and stuff that are bad for your gut lining? Like you said, it's on an individual basis. So like some people might have irritation with sucralose and some might not, but at the end of the day, it's still not good for everyone. So what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously the pro-inflammatory ultra-processed foods and all the ingredients that are not supposed to be in the human gut that are creating challenges, some more for some than for others. But there's a whole world of minimally processed foods, plant foods, colorful foods, right, that have obvious beneficial effects. And I think the main question that remains unanswered about ultra-processed foods is if someone's eating, 50% or more of those, which is common in the US and other developed countries, is the problem that folks have with gut bacteria and inflammation from the additives? Is it from the emulsifiers and the inflammatory oils and the added sugars? Or is it from the lack of minimally processed foods, right? Is someone's eating a lot of those foods, they're probably not eating lentils, salmon, broccoli, and walnuts, right? And so it's hard to know if someone has gut dysbiosis, if it's from the presence of pro-inflammatory stuff or the absence of anti-inflammatory stuff. And it's obviously both, but everyone's going to be a little bit different there. There's some people that have very resilient guts and can do well eating ultra-processed foods. Usually it's people of older, previous generations, anyone that grew up in the 80s and 90s that's been eating this food their whole life, they're kind of born into the world with these imbalanced guts and have higher mental health risks, et cetera. Folks that were raised before that time tend to have built a strong foundation early on. In nutrition, we talk about the first 1,000 days of life, those first 3 years as being critical for the development of a healthy gut biome.
That's super interesting. I'll tell you, I'm one of those that's not immune to processed foods. My gut cannot handle it. So I've definitely had to make lifestyle changes that way. What is the connection just overall of like nutrition to mental health? Like how do you teach people that in a simple manner?
Yeah, I have 3 buckets that I tend to focus on. The first is the most obvious, and these are nutrients that are related to brain health, right? And there's, been a lot of studies looking at micronutrients, and if they are deficient or insufficient, they tend to associate with negative mental health outcomes, anxiety, depression, et cetera. And there's some, all stars there. Magnesium, zinc, iron, a lot of the B vitamins, vitamin D is really important for mental health as well. But if you look at the research, most vitamins and minerals, when deficient or insufficient, are associated with adverse mental health. And it's probably not fully elucidated all the mechanisms, because, some have more activity in the brain than others. Some cross the blood-brain barrier, others don't. But that's the basics, nutrients for brain health, right? Needing basic, some of them are direct, like omega-3. It's direct. It goes into the brain. It's part of cell membranes in the brain, right? Like it is actually, your brain is mostly fat. So omega-3 is an example of a direct nutrient. And there's some that are more indirect because they're involved in biochemical pathways. They're cofactors, right? Things like magnesium. Some magnesium crosses the blood-brain barrier, some doesn't. And so that's bucket one. Bucket two is what we talked about with the gut-brain axis, the bidirectional axis of communication between the gut and the brain. And I have mentioned that my interest there is mostly on the inflammatory cascade that can start in the gut, travel throughout the periphery and cross the blood-brain barrier. That's an emerging field called psychoneuroimmunology. Very fascinating research. And the third bucket is where I've spent a lot of time helping folks, is what I like to call nutritional psychology. That's not just biological factors, but how we think about food, the socio-cultural context, the meaning that we ascribe, the role of body image, the role of a social identity in a nutrition and exercise context, the role of stress, trauma, and adversity in driving feeding behaviors, et cetera. So I've done a lot of work with people that have addictions. And so understanding the role of nutrition as it affects the dopamine system, the reward pathways, has been a big focal point for me in my career.
Yeah, so just having a healthy brain, which is essential to mood and wellness, there's certain nutrients that we just need to have for a healthy brain. And then, like you talked about, the gut-brain axis. That third one is one that's probably a little bit more sort of the type of area that we focus on, because what we're focusing on is helping people build mental fitness and understanding how nutrition, exercise, and sleep, those health and vitality pillars, play into it. When we talk about, people having a bad relationship with food, by the way, I installed your app and have got started, and you talk a lot about the bad relationship with food. What exactly does that mean? And I mean, I'm kind of joking here, but I'm saying, like, I don't have a bad relationship with food. I love all of it. I'll eat anything. That doesn't feel like a bad relationship. But what do you mean by bad relationship exactly?
Yeah, I don't think I use that exact term, but maybe it's a dysfunctional relationship with food or a challenging relationship with food. And it could mean a lot of things. I spent a lot of my career doing eating disorder work. And so I tend to have a soft spot or a sensitivity for people that have really struggled with food and body stuff. The easiest example is on the onboarding process in my app. I ask a few questions. One of them is, what percentage of the day do you spend thinking about food? And what percentage of the day do you spend thinking about your body? Those are like pretty big indicators for me on how much noise someone has on these topics. It could be that someone spends a lot of time thinking about food and body, and it's the best thing that they could ever do for themselves because they're now invested in change in this area. But there are quite a lot of people that spend a lot of energy or bandwidth thinking about food and body, and it makes it difficult for them to have energy to put toward other things.
It actually becomes an impedance, perhaps, to them eating better?
Yes, there is a lot of conflict around choices. There's a lot of undereating matched with overeating, right? We call it the restrict binge cycle. And I think that this area, doesn't get enough attention in the sort of fitness conversation, because a lot of this control or willpower that people can exert, again, could be really, really helpful for one person, but could really hijack someone else's brain and their mind and make it difficult to integrate into their lives and eat with other people, et cetera.
That's interesting because we've had another episode dedicated to sleep. We've had Dr. Jade Wu, a sleep psychologist, and sort of in a similar vein, different area of wellness. But the anxiety about sleep is one of the number one inhibitors to healthy sleep. When we're stressed about whether we're sleeping enough, that can actually hurt our sleep. And like you said, for some, being conscious and aware of our sleep and measuring it can be helpful because it's motivating. But for others, it just raises our stress and anxiety, and then we're constantly worried if we're doing it enough, and then it actually hurts our sleep. So I kind of see in what you said a little bit of a similar theme there, that if we're focusing too much on what we're eating and our food, and we're thinking constantly about food in our body, it may be harder to be disciplined in eating right.
Someone could move into a meal with a little bit of a fight or flight response because they're not sure if they should be eating this, or they don't have the calories in the macros on it because it came from a hot bar at Whole Foods, or something is uncertain, and there's an anxiety response, and that could actually change one's biology to make the digestive process more challenging. And some people come out of meals with a lot of conflict as well, and that can be damaging. I've made the argument that for some people, not all people, but some people, the stress about eating the piece of pizza could be worse for their health than the piece of pizza itself.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Wow.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you've done a lot of work with people in, addiction recovery, right? That I'd imagine, that's interesting because just the role of dopamine in itself around food and like highly palatable foods and processed foods, like that, even just when you're about to eat something, that probably causes a dopamine spike, right? Mm-hmm. So, and there's a lot of dopamine in play with addictions, right? So what do you see there? Because my thought is in 2025, a lot of people have problems with their dopamine levels and baseline just due to social media, constant stimulation, right? So there's got to be some kind of connection there with food as well.
I think it's the number one topic. I really do. The neuroscience of eating behavior and the dopamine response that's elicited from ultra-processed food, comfort eating. I think it's the most important piece in this conversation. And as you pointed out, the world is changing to where people are more susceptible to reward-based behaviors, convenience eating, and convenience seeking as a whole. People are more susceptible to daily stressors and adversity. I call it pre-traumatic stress disorder, right? Like just waiting for the ball to drop, right? And in that state, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that weighs pros and cons and does executive functioning, is less accessible to the person. So an individual will likely be living more in the reptilian part of the brain where it's more basic dopamine seeking. And I do believe that food manufacturers as well as social media companies exploit this neurobiology for their ultimate profit. If people can be moving through life in fight or flight and uncertain, they're going to be more likely to be impulsive and to have compulsive behaviors. And I think the combination of rising stress and adversity and pre-traumatic stress disorder in our society mixed with convenience foods and other behaviors makes a perfect storm for private profits over public health.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we have to deal with that. Is a big part of you helping clients then just starting with that psychoeducation around it all, helping them understand how it functions and how it works?
Huge. Yeah. To be able to explain to someone the values that we can assign to food. There's a term in addiction neuroscience and psychiatry called salience. It's an experience that becomes more memorable. And so the brain upregulates the memory of something that's rewarding. And if it's done in a time of distress, like if someone has a low spot, they're having emotional issues, and they eat some highly palatable food at 10 o'clock, the brain will remember that food more than if they ate it in a good mood. So it assigns it more value and it's more salient. And when someone has that same negative affective state in a different day, a different moment, the brain will cue up the memory of the substance, the food, that basically made that emotion go away, at least for a minute or two. And that's the cycle of addiction. Most people understand addiction as having underlying emotional stressors, anxiety symptoms, depressive symptoms as the driver of the consumption behavior. But we now know from addiction research that if someone does that enough times, when they don't do it, it can actually generate the negative emotion. So that's the withdrawal cascade. Someone is used to comfort eating, and when they try to stop, they get a lot of unrest and it feels uncomfortable until they eat the thing, and then it seems to go away, and people get trapped in a loop of dopamine seeking with food.
Wow. So phase one might be just the psychoeducation of helping people understand that, but what's maybe like phase two? Or how do you help people along that journey?
If you think about like a risk factor for binge eating or overeating, the cluster of risk factors, you have the negative emotionality. You have, for some people, the hunger levels and the appetite. And then you also have the food environment, right? So if someone has underate for the day, they've starved themselves, or they went spinning and didn't have a meal afterwards, and they're underfed, and then there's an emotional challenge, and the food is readily available within arm's reach, it's a recipe for loss of control eating. So when you think about levers that we can pull, obviously we can make sure to stay well-fed and well-nourished, which is a big part of the work that we do in nutrition, helping people kind of not run into starvation states, right? Where they're more likely to make impulsive choices. So staying well-fed and well-nourished, making some changes in the food environment, and then having some skills to regulate emotions, whether it be breathing, journaling, talking to someone. That's when all the social support can come in, or even spirituality.
That's very cool. Let's think of like a real world example. Imagine I'm obviously I'm a male, but I'm generally healthy, but nighttime snacking, like processed sugary sweets and stuff, like I just can't stop it. I've tried so many things. Like how would you go about helping me?
Luke's describing me because he wants me to get help. So, thank you, Luke.
No, that's not true.
Yeah. There's definitely some trial and error because everyone responds differently. You know, for some people, having tools to quote unquote resist temptation will be helpful. And for someone else, like actually eating the food with less guilt and shame could be helpful, right? Sometimes it's not the food that we're eating, but what's eating us, that could be helpful. For other people, having like a swap, like instead of having, ice cream, you had frozen sweet dark cherries with some full fat French yogurt on it, and you whipped it up and it was creamy and cold, right? Having something that's similar, but not the exact sort of binge food could be helpful. But yeah, I do like to teach people that one of the reasons why the brain is signaling so hard is because it's received that message before. It's traveled that neural pathway, and that neural pathway is dominating. And that if you want to have other options on the menu, for your mind, that you need to travel other pathways enough times to where it can be suggested as an alternative, right? So getting people out of the cycle is the hard part, and, maintaining it with skills and emotion regulation, that's what we call recovery.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I think, honestly, just hearing some of that, some of the psychoeducation piece is motivating to me, in terms of understanding maybe sort of what's happening underneath. I want to go back to just something you said earlier. You kind of just said it there. It's not about what we're eating, but what's eating us. And you said for some people, maybe eating the stress or the anxiety of eating the piece of pizza is more harmful for health than the piece of pizza itself. And honestly, I hadn't really thought as much about this in terms of, I've been thinking about the nutrition, how the nutrition helps our mental health or hurts our mental health by the contents of what we're eating. I hadn't considered how we feel about what we're eating. So in that vein, helping people have a healthy relationship or feeling better about themselves in the way they're eating. I mean, some of that's going to come from change behavior, but what's the kind of the process of helping someone, feel less anxious or guilt for that piece of pizza?
To actually neutralize the charge, as I would call it. Yeah. The framework is broadly, harm reduction. In, for example, addiction treatment, a pretty obvious goal for most people is to be completely abstinent, right? To touch none of it and have very black and white rules about what you can do and what you can't do. And an abstinence-based approach works really well for some people, but it can backfire because we do see situations where someone, if they believe that if they have one, they're going to have 100. Sometimes that belief is very helpful because it anchors someone to abstinence, right? Like you hear people in the recovery circle say, I don't drink because if I drink, I'm going to go downtown and cop, right? And like that narrative is very helpful to get someone to not drink, And so oftentimes we build psychological narratives that help protect us, but they can also be damaging because let's say someone does have a slip and now they think they have to burn the house down, right? That's the rigid black and white thinking that a lot of people struggle with. And sometimes you see it with food. I did so good all week. Friday night, I had a treat, a dessert, and I felt like I had to go get another one and another one. And for some people, that truly is the brain taking over, the addictive process. But for other people, it's just the failure of the narrative that was built to keep them safe.
It's so refreshing to hear. I mean, because there's obviously such convergence and interconnectivity with psychology and nutrition, right? Like, but I don't think it's talked about enough, right? Like, but it's so refreshing to hear. It makes so much sense.
Yeah. Emerging field called nutritional psychology. There's something called the Center for Nutritional Psychology, and I'm involved in that organization. It's a nonprofit, and there is some training that's offered to people, and it's pretty obvious to a lot of folks that we want to bridge gaps between nutrition and psychology. And it does seem like the nutrition field isn't moving as quickly into the mental health field as the mental health field is moving into nutrition. But a lot of folks, especially licensed professionals, have all these concerns about their scope of practice and the boundaries, right? Like mental health professionals are sometimes worried if they give too much nutrition advice, they're making some ethical mistakes and going outside of their scope. And I know a lot of dietitians feel the same way about providing psychological counseling. You got to quote unquote stay in your lane. So that's why they've been sort of siloed. But I do believe that there are considerable efforts to bridge the gaps between nutrition and mental health fields. And it's been cool to be a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a holistic. You have to have a holistic approach. I mean, when we think about mental health, I mean, one of the pillars is sleep, nutrition, and exercise. But like you said, the experts are siloed typically. I mean, there's individuals like yourself that I think are bridging those gaps, but you have the siloed experts. And I've actually heard those words of staying in your lane and, oh yeah, I don't go down that path with my clients because I'm not a nutritionist. It's like, well, but you can tell that like that's the number one problem in their life. Like,
right.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, someone that had disordered eating or had gut challenges and was in therapy, and that's a primary presenting concern. Perfect world, they'd have, a therapist, possibly a psychiatrist or a functional medicine doctor, a nutritionist, a movement specialist or a trainer, right? And they'd have all this different team and everyone was talking to each other. But in practical reality, like, practitioners don't have time to talk to 3 other practitioners after every session. And, people feel like they're getting, and it's expensive because insurance doesn't cover most of it, right? And so we do need people that are able to sort of bridge some of those gaps and be comprehensive just based on the fact that people can't afford a whole care team.
Well, one of the ways we're trying to offer something more comprehensive in the mental health industry is in the preventative nature of what we're doing, right? Because, I wonder if that's an area where people could come together, all these different licensed professionals, because from a preventative nature, it's not like diagnosis and stuff. It's like, hey, these are the core principles in these cross-threaded areas that you can do to sustain your well-being. And that's what mental fitness is to us. Mental fitness is that active process, that daily process to sustain your well-being, right? It's not to get there, it's to sustain. So a lot of these principles you've talked about are just that. Like if you do this, that'll sustain your mental fitness, right?
I agree. It's a tough sell for a lot of folks, this prevention idea, if someone doesn't believe they have a problem or doesn't see the need to invest their time and energy in something before it's a dire situation. But I think a lot of people are waking up to this idea of like, I don't feel great and I have no idea how good I could possibly feel. Like to wake up in the morning with energy and not feel like I have to rush to get a cup of coffee before I can think, or right? Just feeling baseline calm, safe in the world, not detecting threats. Most people don't actually know what that feels like. And once you get a taste of it, you want to share it, have other people know what it's like to have a clear mind. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have a clear mind all the time. I did have an experience this year where I was blown away. I was always against fasting because I do a lot of eating disorder work, and I did a 5-day fasting mimicking diet, and all my anxiety went away. I was just clear-minded, and I don't recommend fasting in my app, right? But I realized that I had a bias against it because I don't generally recommend it or do it. And I was like, oh, because I have a bias against it, that means I have to try it. I have to try it because otherwise I'm like, skewing people towards the lens of my own personal experience. And it was actually really, really insightful, specifically as it related to mental health and my cognitive processes. I was super calm for a few days. It was great.
On the fasting, and we could do a whole episode on fasting. That's a whole other topic we won't go into here, but it is almost something you have to experience. And we're definitely not recommend people do fasting, like talk to your doctors and medical professionals, but experiencing it like a 72-hour fast or something, there has to be some connection to the inflammation again. Like your body's just healing itself during that. So
yeah. I actually did a urine test after to see what I was mobilizing from my fat. And I saw I had some BPA and some other stuff my body was just getting rid of. And it made sense to me why, it's such a promoted approach for longevity. But yeah, I got really curious about ketosis and mental health because, obviously there's a lot of literature, ketogenic diet, fasting, a lot of that stuff is popping up, and I have a job to like stay up to date on the latest. And one of the things I really was able to determine for myself was that, and I know this from gut bacteria testing, that I have low GABA, which is a neurotransmitter that is calming, right? Associated with anxiety. And I have high glutamate, which is the excitatory neurotransmitter. And that ketogenic state actually can balance out the glutamate GABA ratio to where a lot of my anxiety was gone. So that's another like pretty big lever to pull that I didn't touch on, is not just, micronutrients and real food and psychology, but also the effect of the major macronutrients on brain health is just really worth saying out loud.
One of the things we've noticed in talking to experts in different areas is most people who are sleep deprived don't think they're sleep deprived. Most people who are not moving and exercising enough are consciously aware that that's an issue in their life or a contributing factor, the way they feel. A lot of people with early onset anxiety don't think of themselves of having these problems. And so some of it is helping people be made aware. Like you said earlier, I didn't know how much better I could feel. So when we think in nutrition, most people don't think they're eating all that bad, and they might be eating horribly in terms of what it's doing to their health and their well-being. What's sort of like for listeners, what's sort of like the self-test or the set of questions that you can ask yourself where you could, if you said yes to three of these 5 questions, then you probably need to address anything like that you have, or is it more nuanced?
I mean, I've used a lot of sort of screening tools, mental health questionnaires for many years, and they're informative, but like the real answer is to do a stool test, a food sensitivity test, an organic acid test, and like get a bunch of functional lab tests and see what's out of balance. And I do believe that functional medicine is the future, and it's unfortunate that it's so pricey that not everyone can afford, 6 specialty lab tests. But that approach has really helped a lot of people, not just, I should take these supplements in these phases and follow this protocol, but also when you understand what's imbalanced, it can actually reduce a lot of anxiety. When I learned that I had low GABA, it reduced my anxiety because I knew why I had anxiety. It wasn't just that I'm like a worrier or I have generational trauma. Like I knew there was a biological underpinning, and it was helpful to me.
Wow. So for those interested, how does one go about getting those tests done? You just call up your doctor and...
You got to look for, ideally it would be someone that's certified through the Institute of Functional Medicine like myself at ifm.org. This is where there's a practitioner database. And so, if someone, were to work with me or the equivalent, we have access to a lot of specialty lab tests and could, the real value that people like myself bring is not just being able to authorize the tests, because a lot of people have access to these tests now, but to be able to interpret them in the context of other tests and to interpret it in the context of someone's mental health, their medications, et cetera.
Yeah. And when you say access to this expense, let's just say that you're in Los Angeles, I'm in Orange County, I drive up and I schedule an appointment. What is it like? What's the time commitment? What's my out of pocket? If I'm like, I'm all in, I want to get all these tests done and I want to sit down with you and have a session to interpret it.
Yeah. Specialty lab tests, range anywhere from, like 400 to 800, some of the more comprehensive ones. Generally speaking, about $500 a pop. I have a bundle of 6 functional lab tests that I put together, which is $3,075. And it's a mental health focused approach. So it looks at hormones. There's a genetic component. I mentioned organic acids, blood for functional needs, as well as nutrient status. It includes standard labs too, thyroid panel, autoimmune stuff, and a stool test. And then to be able to have them analyzed all in real time is really, really life-changing. So, I have a program where someone could come in and do an intake, get on board with all 6 of my favorite tests, and we can obviously customize them. Some people need a total tox burden test as well. And then, within 6 weeks, you've got a lot of results and you've got a full map, a 4-month, 5-month kind of protocol. And the real value of using AI in this context is to think about taking certain supplements separate from other supplements, separating them from medications, et cetera. And then also thinking about other clever interventions, like if someone has a lot of toxin accumulation, adding the sauna, taking 100 milligrams of niacin before the sauna. There's a lot of really creative stuff that we're doing.
I see Luke nodding his head. He's a big believer in sauna.
I am a big believer. I could see how that, that testing is such a good starting point. However, for those that cannot access that, I'm sure you've worked with clients and patients where, they've seen a notable shift in their wellness and mental health after trying things out. So if you could just generalized approach, what's one small shift most people could make this week or over the next couple of weeks to feel a difference?
Yeah. And again, as you said, there's usually trial and error. When we don't have testing, we got to do some guessing, right? To do a little bit of experimentation. I do like to have some people start with like thinking about meal timing. because I do believe that's an important first lever to pull. Some people, their eating is erratic and it's unpredictable and they eat at different times. Some people do benefit from a very clear and consistent signal, of eating breakfast pretty quickly and having regular meals spaced throughout the day. Other people do better on a window, right? Like an intermittent fasting type of approach. And it depends on someone's mental health and their recovery journey. If someone has a lot of trauma, for example, I do think it's important to create consistency, to send a really clear, consistent message to the body and to the brain that we're safe, there's no shortages, right? Everything is coming, we're well fed, we're well nourished. And then to think about playing with other meal timing strategies at some point. So I like to think about when to eat before what to eat. And then when we move into what to eat, I do like to think about just focusing on eating quote unquote real food, right? Reducing exposure to ultra processed foods and eating minimally processed foods. I'm a big fan of plants. I'm super into protein, and I know that there's a lot of carnivore folks nowadays, and but I do personally and professionally endorse colorful fruits and vegetables. I think most experts would agree. And I do like to encourage people to get all colors of the rainbow in the course of a day. That's blue, purple, yellow, orange, green, and red. If you can get all 4 colors of the rainbow every day, that's a really good place to be. And then after what to eat, I like to move into how to eat. The mindfulness practices, the way people actually engage with food, the rate at which people consume food, the chewing, right? The cooking, the cleanup, all the other factors that go into play. And I have made the argument that if people focus on when to eat, what to eat, and how to eat, the how much to eat question just kind of falls into place. You don't have to focus so much on 3/4 of a cup or it has to be 40 grams. I think a lot of people want to start there and just get the prescription. People do reach out to me. They're like, I just want a meal plan. I'm like, hey, you can create a meal plan in AI. You don't need me for that, Go for it. You don't. We like that skill is not, it's outsourced now. You don't need an expert to generate a 2,400 calorie meal plan with 150 grams of protein. Like anyone could get that now. So like there's a need for a deeper work, and that's what I try to provide.
That's fascinating. I think it's kind of interesting that the first thing you said is when to eat. That's not what I expected, but it's interesting because our sleep psychologist that we work with, that's also what she says. The best place to start on sleep is consistent rise time. Not even bedtime, just rise time. If you can just consistently get up at the same time, that's the first thing. And so I'm just seeing a pattern here. If I can consistently get up at the same time and have some consistency in my meal time.
And have a bowel movement in the morning too. That's also important.
Yeah.
If someone tells me they go to sleep and they wake up at the same time roughly, and they have a bowel movement roughly at the same time every day, and they have a regular schedule, that's a huge indicator of health for me.
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear. And then, but then I love that second is what we eat, and then how we eat, and how much is almost not a major issue if we're eating at consistent times. We're focused on real foods with lots of plants, the colors of the rainbow, and then being mindful in our eating. Then I love the how much, because that's probably the thing I stress most about.
Most people.
But I'm also realizing my meal time's inconsistent. Yeah, so that gives me some immediately actionable things but it's super easy.
The eating disorder recovery world, yeah, I think we make a discernment between following external cues versus following internal cues. And a lot of people just want to be cued, like with the diet plan. And some people need that, and I'm not against it, but the real impact that someone like me could have through weeks or months of counseling is to empower someone to trust their internal cues, so that when we're done, I know that they're good. You're free to go, go chase your dreams,
I like those 3 things. I just want to repeat them, like meal timing, what to eat, and you say real food, minimally processed foods, and how to eat. And with how to eat is mindfulness. So that maybe this is one of the last topics I want to dive into a little bit with you on mindful eating. Does that mean you notice how you feel after you eat certain things? Is that a part of it? Or what is mindfulness practices with eating?
There's a lot of tools there, but yeah, essentially gaining interoceptive awareness and being in touch with your hunger and fullness cues. Most people have a separation between their body and brain and aren't attuned to their appetite. The best way to work on that is to, get grounded before a meal, take a couple cycles of breath, and to eat slower. Mindfulness is basically doing what you're doing while you're doing it and just being there. It's a tough sell to get someone not to scroll or watch TV when they eat, but I think that asking someone to try that at one meal a day could be a really good place to start.
So just diving in that, mindful eating is not eating in front of the TV or scrolling while you're eating. And what is it that our brain is disconnected? We're eating almost on autopilot while our mind is elsewhere.
It's just a level of attunement. We do live in a multitasking world, and most of us are multitasking. But if you practice, like I said, being in the moment, doing what you're doing while you're doing it, you'll be more likely to be attuned to your body's cues, which is essentially the goal.
Yeah. So maybe you're more susceptible to overeating if you're just eating while watching TV because you're not paying attention to your body's cues or that type kind of thing.
For sure.
Well, yeah. And again, the intersection of all of the areas of wellness for a human being, mindfulness is, if you're really good at mindfulness and attunement in general, like that's not going to be hard to do in the eating sphere as well, right? So that makes sense.
Practice principles in one area of our lives, they tend to spill over to other areas. And that's really a good way to think about mental health.
Yeah, it's just, for me, one of the main I just have two main takeaways. So from this, the first one is how much the things you're saying overlaps with what we hear from our sleep psychologist in different domains, but not overstressing and how we feel about it is impacting it, consistent schedule. That whole concept is fascinating to me. But then the other one that is almost really sort of a burden off my shoulders or relief is just how easy it feels. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but when, what, and how, and then not even worrying about how much for now, right? That's kind of my main takeaway. What about you, Luke? What have you gotten out of this?
Yeah, I love the when, what, and how as well. And then just you didn't say this, but I think this is what I heard throughout is just intention. Like I think a lot more people just need to have true intention behind what they're consuming. If it's quick and fast, that's probably a highly processed food. It's easy to put in front of your family at the end of the day. Fruit is quick and fast too, and that's not a processed food. So that's an overgeneralization. But I think, just eat real food.
And I'll wrap up with this is that, everyone has slightly different values. Some people value convenience in their life more than others. Some people have the ability to value, for example, locally grown food. And I do think it's important in the process of providing education to help people eat in alignment with their own values.
Wow, very good. That's a great point to end on. We like to end each session just with a few rapid fire questions. We just ask a question and you just say the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
So I'll get started here. Favorite brain food?
Walnuts.
Sweet tooth or salty cravings?
Sweet tooth.
Coffee, tea, or neither?
I'm on the wagon, off the wagon all the time with the coffee. Let's be honest here. I'm quitting all the time.
I love the honesty.
It's easy to quit coffee. You've done it hundreds of times, right?
I've quit so many times.
Last book you recommended to someone?
There's a book called The Indoctrinated Brain.
Ooh, I'm going to write that down.
Dream place to travel?
The rainforest.
One food you'll never give up, no matter what the science says?
Dairy.
Oh.
Okay.
First thing you do every morning?
Bowel movement.
I love that. Most overrated nutrition trend right now?
Carnivore.
Oh, I like
That's
it.
fair.
Well, awesome. This was great. I thank you for the time. Is just super, super enlightening for us. And I've got a lot of things to work
masterclass.
on. Yes.
This is awesome.
Right on, you guys. Great to connect today. To be continued.
Yes, to be continued. Thank you so much. Take care.